All right, James, welcome back to the show, man. How's things?
Great. It's great to be back, Vinny. And actually that's my middle name.
Oh, nice, nice. I didn't know that. No way. That's cool. Well, listen, man, it's been a while since we've spoken, and recently we've heard this new buzz phrase, this new buzzword, psionics, which, for a lot of people that have been in this subject for a while, is just another way of almost saying human initiated contact. And, you're the man that always kind of has done so many great videos on that aspect of the phenomena. So I thought, I got to get James on and talk about it and dig into a little bit of the history as well that people may not be fully aware of. But I'd like to start off by just sort of saying, I see a lot of people saying that they really want to go out and do psionics or HICE or CE5, but is it simply a case of just going out and looking up and thinking positive thoughts, or is there a lot more to it than that?
So I don't want to overcomplicate it. Of course, with any subject, especially if you're considering like I want to go out and initiate contact with non-human intelligence, that is a pretty serious, you know, some attempt to try something, right? So I mean, generally speaking, it's worthwhile if people have their stuff together, right, so to speak. If you're in a bad place mentally or emotionally, that that might not be the best space that you want to go out and initiate contact with non-human intelligence for a number of reasons. If I want to be speculative, I can say that when you're in like fear and anxiety based states or even trauma based states, you could attract whatever is reverberating that same energy or vibe, right? Uh, there's also the cognitive overlay of your own stuff. So if you're in that kind of like a negative or fear based or something kind of mood or season, however you want to say, and you go out and do this like a CE5, even if nothing truly anomalous happens and you're just projecting, it's not going to be a positive outcome, right? Most likely. Uh, I also want to say you could have the most wonderful CE5 or psionic experience, right? I mean, look at Jake Barber. He shared his testimony on News Nation with Ross Coulthart, and you have this hardened veteran, top tier, tier one operator, coming to tears recalling his experience. So that's intense. So you can have a completely wonderful, positive experience, and you don't know how that is going to add up in your life. So even let's just say that you go out with positive intentions, everything in your life is great, right? Work is great, spouse is great, kids are great, or whatever your situation is. There's nothing out of place, right? You're doing well, and now you're like, oh, I'm going to initiate contact with non-human intelligence. You go ahead and do that, and all of a sudden you're just like, wait, why am I working my job? I could be, like, this is all an illusion kind of thing. The 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 ramifications, even of a positive close encounter with non-human intelligence, could change your relationship dynamic, right? Say you're married for 10 years and all of a sudden, UFOs or non-human intelligence was never part of the situation, and all of a sudden now you're an experiencer. How is your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, what have you? How are they going to take that? So there's all types of pros and cons. Ultimately, there's people that are just going to do it, right? There's people that there's no question in their mind, they're just going to go out and do it. And for better or worse, I guess those are the people that should probably do it, because to kind of speak on both sides, like the pros and cons and devil's advocate and whatnot. If you have that kind of fearlessness, or in some people may say recklessness. Uh, that kind of attitude is actually going to gear you towards success, in my opinion, as well. If there's like no reservations, but I when I first got into this, right, like I had my own experiences that were kind of in your face contact experiences, which I did not initiate. And that's how I ended up coming into the CE5 work through searching for answers. What happened? How can I take this to the next level and such. Uh, so there's so many different parts of the conversation when you're talking about human initiated contact uh, that back then I was super gung ho about it. I didn't even put out a disclaimer. Now I do put out a disclaimer after years of experience and contemplation. I I do want to say, for the record, and coming from an informed opinion, because I started the first CE5 social networking groups back in 2009. Before that, the only real kind of thing out there was the CSETI forum, which was like an old school internet forum, and it was not too active. And you have Facebook out at that time, and I'm like, why is nobody like doing this on social networking? It's so much easier. Uh, so I got to work with many field working group coordinators, field working, CE5 field working group coordinators, members, people who were veterans and experienced, and people who were brand new to it. And I got to see a lot based on that, right? Like the people's general attempts, experiences, and what have you. And it's 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 a really high percentage, generally speaking, that if you go out with positive intentions, you're going to have a positive encounter with non-human intelligence, or whatever you want to attribute to CE5. There's a lot of people who caution against it, for better or worse, right? I think that there's some good arguments to be made about it, and I think that there's mm, uh, arguments that are more, uh, or maybe I'm trying to think of the word. I'd say kind of overly paranoid, but again, it's not to be taken lightly. So that's I'll leave my 2 cents there, and we can go on.
Yeah, no, no, I appreciate that because myself, and I imagine this is similar for a lot of people, I was first made aware of CE5 through Dr. Stephen Greer. And, Greer's take on the phenomenon itself is that these are extraterrestrials. They are friendly. They're here to help us. And anyone can go outside and, do CE5 and potentially see these beings or these craft. And when I first saw that, I was like, wow, that's incredible. But then, the more I've been involved in this subject and in the community, you hear a lot more people with reservations about the implications about what it could not necessarily mean at the time, but things that could happen after the fact that may not be 100% positive. And so I've always erred on the side of caution, and I've never actually tried it myself, but I've been kind of keeping my eye on it and following it along with it. And through a lot of searches online, you see videos of people, either individuals or groups, doing CE5, and you see a small dot of light in the distance, and they're saying, it's here to visit us. And I'm not saying that's all videos, but that seems to be the majority. Have you experienced, or are you aware of any other experiences of people doing CE5 where it's been something a lot more intimate than just a distant object?
Absolutely, and I mean, you're probably not going to find too many videos of a lot of this. Christopher Bledsoe did put out some videos where there's some lights in the area, right, in the trees and what have you. So when you're talking about CE5, it's uh, you know it's you have to take a kind of big view on this. And what I mean by that is that, like, CE5 itself does not begin or end with the CE5 protocols. Yeah, I hope this doesn't freak people out, right? But it's like opening a door, right? Once that door is open, right? You hear about the hitchhiker effect, or previously, yeah, before that, Jacques Vallée used to call it post contact effects, and this has a broad range, right? But post contact effect, you can have a CE5 experience, and all of a sudden your psychic perception just opens up, right? Or it just goes, it's elevated way high. And, people experience poltergeist stuff or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing because, again, are they experiencing that anomalous activity because of the UFO encounter? Or is that stuff has kind of already been going on, but now your psychic perception, or your psionics is in tune, so now you're able to actually perceive the stuff that's going on around you all the time. uh, so that's one way to look at it. I had CE5 experiences that ranged from actually seeing something like an egg-shaped craft. It was still up in the sky, but you can see structure to it. There's it's in the literature, whether you're talking about, people from nowadays, some of my own experiences, uh, Dorothy Izat, um, Christopher Bledsoe, Stephen Greer, Mission Rama, they all, if you go through all of the work, there are experiences where there's like a metal craft that comes in, like a regular flying saucer type thing, right? Um, in one of my own experiences, I had orbs in almost a structured formation less than 10 feet away, and that accompanied like an entire, like my entire body had this energy effect to it, like vibration, electricity, what people would call kundalini, all this kind of stuff. And it was intense. It was intense. So there's that part of it where, yeah, there's some in your face stuff that can happen. But there's also the bigger picture idea is where you can do a CE5 session, right? Say you do your like a 20-minute meditation, and then you use whatever contact protocols you're going to use, whether it's the one the Psionic people are using, whether it's Stephen Greer's or Mission Rama's, or your own that you created, uh, and you do that for another 20 minutes, and nothing happens, and you're like, oh well, the CE5 didn't work. And then all of a sudden, the next week or whatever, you completely forgot about it. You get home from work, you get out of your car, and all of a sudden there's some kind of object or anomalous activity that's occurring, right? Or something compels you or tells you to go outside, and you go outside and there's an object waiting there, stationary, and then it blips in and or out or does something anomalous, right? And so was that caused by the CE5 or the psionic attempt a week before? It's like probably. So, uh, there are more intense experiences that can happen than just lights in the sky. And I will say, seeing a video of the lights in the sky kind of thing is, I mean, even when I see it, like I've had hundreds, if not or if not thousands of CE5 type experiences like that, and there's more going on than like a light in the sky. If it's responsive to your thoughts and there's some kind of lock on, there's a lot more going on that you can't really gather from a video.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Again, being in this subject for a bit longer now, and I'm trying sort of seeing that there is a bit more depth to it than just a simple protocol. And we use this phrase CE5, which was coined by Dr. Greer, but I'd like to kind of go back into the historical record when it comes to human initiated contact. And I think it was yourself a few years ago put me onto Mission Rama, which I think was the 1970s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but was there anything, and we'll get into Mission Rama, but was there anything before that that you're aware of?
Yeah. I mean, as far back as you go into history, there's examples of contact modalities, and there's examples of uh, human beings interacting with non-human intelligence. So if you want to go back before then, there's something called religion, And basically every religion is explaining a story about the origins of humanity and our interactions with non-human intelligence, right? Our religions depend on that to be true. Uh, so, but in the, let's say, the modern UFO era, in the 1950s, there were groups of people going out to California, Giant Rock, and there was kind of like the era of the contactees. And those individuals were going out and trying to telepathically engage the phenomenon, right? They were trying to telepathically communicate with UFOs and invite them in. So that had actually been there, right? I mean, there's even that song by this guy named Klaatu, which was redone by the Carpenters in the 70s. I think the Klaatu song is from the late 50s, early 60s. And the whole song is about using telepathy to invite these UFOs and cosmic visitors. It's like it's all right there. Uh, but so, and that was as early as the 1950s. So Mission Rama, they came around in 1972, I believe, with Sixto Paz being the most outspoken member of that group, and I guess you can say the leader of Mission Rama. And a really interesting uh, note about Sixto Paz is that his father in Peru was a famous UFO researcher at the time, and he would attend UFO conferences in the area. So he invited his son, Sixto Paz, to come with him to one of these UFO conferences. And one of the speakers at this UFO conference was a 32nd degree Freemason. And he wanted to teach, or his lecture that he was teaching was how to telepathically communicate with non-human intelligences. So, and the way he taught was through automatic writing. So Sixto Paswell's took what the guy said seriously, tried it with his family, and within, within days, they started getting these messages from this entity who called himself Oxalt, who was apparently uh, a non-human intelligence that had this group had like bases in our solar system, and they actually arranged for what Sixto Paswell's in Mission Rama called a programmed sighting rather than a CE5. They called it a program sighting. And Sixto did one of these sessions. The alleged non-human intelligence Oxalt said, meet us on this day at this time at this desert and this location, and we will appear. So Sixto went with a handful of people, and they were taking it kind of lightly. Some people were there drinking and like, not taking it as seriously as they should be, I guess. And sure enough, right around the exact time that the entity said that it was going to be there, this hamburger or shaped UFO appeared, and it started coming close, and everybody started to freak out, and most of the people left. Yeah, it turned out to be like a kind of a scary event for a lot of people. And then, the UFO intelligence allegedly communicated to Sixto that this was, they have to be more prepared. They have to start practicing meditation and kind of advise them in protocols and to take it more seriously.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I know there is some documentary footage out there of Mission Rama. I don't know if you're able to send me that. I know I think you've sent it to me before. But if you could do that, I can pop it in the description for people to go and check it out if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. I can send you that clip. And the interesting thing about that clip is that it was recorded by the local mainstream media. And, the sightings that happened, right? There's events that are recorded, and this, back in the 70s, 80s, you can see the footage. There weren't drones like there are today 50 years ago, at least, you know, publicly known, and these objects are moving rather anonymously, and it was a program sighting. So they went out, they did protocols to invite the UFO intelligence in, and sure enough, they had this interaction.
What can you tell me about the significance of the Xendra Portals when it comes to the Mission Rama experiences?
Yeah, so that's highly speculative, I'll say, just because the Xendra portals, according to Sixto Paswells and other members of Mission Rama, are essentially portals that are facilitated by non-human intelligence that both that they can come out of or people can go in. And the first time that Sixto Paswells experienced this Xendra portal, he went in and there was a missing time event with the Mission Rama group, and Sixto Paswells came back a few hours later, except, according to him, he was gone for like several days. And according to the people there, that he had like a whole 5 o'clock shadow thing going on, like he had a beard growing, like he was gone for a few days. Uh, but again, I haven't seen great documentation of it. Uh, that doesn't discount the possibility of it being legitimate. I have no doubt that UAP and non-human intelligence have that kind of capability. It's basically what Hal Puthoff would call time-space metric.
Yeah. No, I've definitely heard that before. But whatever happened to the group, because I think you'd think that this kind of thing would grow and it would appeal to a lot of people, especially in the 70s, after the kind of the stuff that happened in the 60s with the hippies and these movements that happened that just grew and grew and grew. Whatever happened to Mission Rama?
Whatever happened to CSETI? With a lot of these groups, what happens is, somebody in the group gets really prideful or gassed up, as we say in over here, full of themselves, or and you have human flaws that compromise the movement. You know, Mission Rama had a hierarchical structure, and the antennas of their group were kind of the leaders, and Sixto Paz Wells was like the number one guy. So just like with Stephen Greer, the CE5 initiative was very promising, right? He had uh, groups of individuals going out and having successful encounters with non-human intelligence using consciousness. Basically, what Skywatcher is talking about, what Stephen Greer is talking about, Sixto Paswells. I mean, that in itself is incredible. But with a lot of these groups, whether it's the leadership or the group dynamics, they just tend to break apart over time. And that's what happened with Mission Rama. There's there's some skeletons in the closet there, just like there is with Dr. Stephen Greer and CSETI.
What about the hoodie books that Sixto Paswells wrote? Can you tell us about them?
So the only book that he has two books that have been written in English, and the one that is most prominent is called The Invitation, by Sixto Paswells, and that book is him explaining his story in detail from beginning to end. And he talks about some of what I said before of how he he was practicing hatha yoga, and so he was practicing meditation. He went to this UFO conference. He learned this protocol. He had successful contact, and then throughout the book, he's talking about how he founded Mission Rama. A lot of the kind of adventures that they went on, some of their initial uh, program sightings, and how they were preparing for them through meditation, concentration exercises. They also would do fasting and a vegetarian diet. So if they knew that they were going to do like they were going to have a program sighting, or they're going to go out to try to initiate contact, they would lighten their diet. But a lot of them became vegetarians over the course of doing the practice. And if you're into Ayurveda, that's what we call like a sattvic diet. So that the book is basically outlining Sixto Paswell's journey into creating Mission Rahma and some of the events and the messages they got from the beings.
And did their work ever spread outside of Peru and South America?
So it spread outside of Peru throughout South America. It did make it to the United States sparsely and kind of on the underground, because realistically, a lot of these people were afraid of the authorities. Not just from a UFO angle, but they didn't want to be deported. Uh, so it was kept very underground for different reasons. Uh, there were many kind of Rama splinter groups throughout South America, and again, there are even today. There's a number of Mission Rama groups, even in the United States and I believe Canada. But I believe there's no more like Sixto Paswell's Mission Rama top down kind of thing. It's become more like splinter groups, similar to what had happened with CSETI and the CE5 working groups. Kind of everybody eventually ended up doing their own thing.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into sort of the Greer era and CE5. And you mentioned CSETI there. So if there was kind of this origin in CSETI that then CE5 kind of came out of, can you tell us about that iteration and when you first heard about it and how it all kind of came into the zeitgeist?
Okay, yeah, that's a there's a few different aspects to that. So CSETI in general was founded by Dr. Stephen Greer, I believe, in 1990, and the founding of CSETI was Dr. Stephen Greer's like first and true mission, which didn't really have anything to do with disclosure. It had to do with using the CE5 protocols and CE5 to create a diplomatic uh, communication with non-human intelligence for the purpose of contact. Not um, whereas like you can say like Skywatcher's emphasis is certainly seems to be on research and development, right? Data collection. And while CSETI did have some type of similar goals, the entire emphasis was on diplomatic communication with non-human intelligence, or as Stephen Greer put it, extraterrestrial intelligence. And that ended up evolving through Dr. Stephen Greer's connections to what we know as the Disclosure Project, Project Starlight, and Stephen Greer ending up acquiring these military witnesses and military advisors, and a lot of them actually came to him after some of these CE5 events took place, and there were some people from local bases and airmen that were at these CSETI events in the early 90s that said, "Hey, boss, uh, they would speak to their commanders and say, we were at this event, and this guy brought in these UFOs." And that is actually how Stephen Greer's military advisor came to hear about him. And, again, that at the time, that was very taboo publicly. Meanwhile, people in the Invisible College and everything were very well aware of that and were researching it and experimenting in private. So Stephen Greer caught the attention of people like Albert Stubblebine, and this has been discussed, and there's a lot of controversy around this. And I believe the general story there is true, in that he probably was approached by Stubblebine and asked. Again, I don't know about the sum of money and all that, but he probably was asked to cooperate with what they were doing. It only makes sense, right? Um, So I do think that aspect of it happened, but again, there were people like John Peterson who approached Stephen Greer, and John Peterson was the one who set up the meeting with sitting CIA Director James Woolsey. Uh, so, the, there was a letter that came out with Woolsey and Peterson. Saying, oh, that didn't really happen as you describe it, and they signed like this letter, but you know, Stephen Greer has the original invitation from John
Have you
Peterson.
seen that? Is that public?
It is, and it's the whole thing's a little obvious. And James Woolsey came forward a few years ago, actually on John Greenwald's podcast, and said, yeah, something like that happened. So, more or less, that did happen, and it was when Woolsey was the sitting director of the CIA for President Clinton. Uh, but my involvement, even before my involvement, let's say, so actually think that the CE5 initiative that Dr. Stephen Greer created, or that movement, so to speak, the modern iteration of trying to initiate contact through consciousness and what he called the contact trilogy, probably did as well as it did just because he was also, on the other hand, doing all the disclosure stuff. So that all kind of, that's how I found Stephen Greer, right? Uh, I had a number of kind of in your face contact experiences. Um, I had other experiences when I was younger, but by the time in 2007, I'm 20 years old. I have a series of very intense contact experiences that I've described in some videos and interviews. And I was like looking for answers. And by, I want to say, around 2008, 2009, I came across a disclosure project. And I remember seeing a clip from the disclosure project. I had seen the Clifford Stone clip talking about the 57 different catalog species of aliens. So I remembered that, but I had only seen that clip and I didn't know what it was from. It was just a random like 3-minute video on YouTube. Back then the YouTube's still kind of newish at that time. Uh, and so I came across the Full Disclosure Project, and there's all these military witnesses, and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? This guy's like a random doctor. Why is he the one like leading this thing with all these military witnesses? And how did I not hear that this happened? Right? Because it wasn't like I wasn't researching UFOs. I had been researching UFOs, but I just hadn't heard of the Disclosure Project at that time. So I watched the Full Disclosure Project, and I'm like, I got to find out who this guy is, who is part of it, Dr. Stephen Greer. And I came across his some of his lectures and talks, and in the talks, he was actually discussing how contact occurs. And when I was watching the videos, I was like, I was pretty well convinced that he was legitimate, just because the level of detail and nuance that he was communicating about how contact occurs is just, I hadn't heard about people talking about that publicly, and it's the kind of information that through firsthand experience. Um, but at the same time, I wanted to kind of like test it out, so to speak. So I mean, at that point, I was researching as much as I could about CE5 and contact and everything. Part and due because when I had my experiences, one of the major kind of takeaways was that like nobody could is really gonna get it unless they have that kind of experience on that level. I mean, the transformative quality of contact. Like I could tell my story to somebody about a close encounter, and they can intellectually grasp, like, okay, I get what he's talking about. But until you have that kind of experience for yourself, that's the like the meaningfulness of the interaction, that and the takeaway from the contact is the firsthand experience, because the firsthand experience of it is transformative, right? And it's I get, it's different than watching a video or reading a book. um you can try to explain any, uh, something like an app, like what an orange tastes like to somebody, and they can be like, yeah, I get it. It's sweet. It's whatever. But until you actually taste it yourself, it's like, then you have the realization and what you want to call like the knowledge or the gnosis of what an orange is. So that intimate level of understanding, when you have a kind of close encounter, all these different fragmented pieces just lock into place in like an alignment of, I don't know if you want to say like the cosmos, right? Like us as humans, our place in the universe, kind of thing. Um, that kind of effect, I can at least say psychologically, it will leave an impression on you. Um, so when I came across the CE5 work, I, I dove in and I started practicing, and within short time, I was already having results of at least seeing what you can consider anomalous events. And uh, after, I was convinced it was real from that. I started forming the CE5 networks on Facebook and whatnot. Uh, and I did go to two CSETI events with Dr. Stephen Greer to kind of vet him. Is like, even if he's saying all these things and it's very convincing, I still want to go there for myself and see it. And at those two events, one was a 3-day event, and the other was like a whole week long ambassador to the universe training. And there, despite what happened with the Vero Beach flare thing, there were genuine and anomalous events that occurred, during those CSETI events. And, what a lot of people don't realize is that Dr. Stephen Greer was like the Christopher Bledsoe of the 1990s. You have He really was. Because he was this kind of like civilian guy who comes in, is having these contact experiences, and then the intelligence community swarms them. So that happened with Dr. Stephen Greer, with Stubblebine, with all these military advisors, um, and other, Ron Pandolfi, John Alexander. There was a lot of interest in Stephen Greer in the 90s. And he's claiming he's using remote viewing and interacting with UFOs, and there are results, right? So the events that I went to, there were genuine anomalous interactions. And I mean, it could be that it's because the other people in the group were there. I don't know, but either way, I'll say it's, the CE5s there were genuine. Uh, yeah, so from that point, I was very involved in CE5 since then, because I realized, you know, I at least with CE5, you can kind of you can people can have their own experience ultimately if they want to go that far.
Yeah. I mean, let's touch upon that beach incident, because there's so much speculation and rumor flying around that Greer paid a pilot to drop these flares, and it was for this group that had paid thousands of dollars to be there to see UFOs. So what do you know about that, or what are your thoughts on it?
If you look at the video, everything in that video screams flares. The way that they appear, or the way that they manifest in the order, the way that they go against the breeze, the way that they disappear as if like flares going out. Everything about it says flares. Did he stage that? man, if he did, that's really bad on him. I don't see that as an impossibility, because, you know, again, those events at that point were raised up to like $2,500 a person, and it was like limited to like 20 or 25 people. And I guess there's a lot of pressure in that, right? You got these people coming from all over, paying all kinds of money. I don't see it as an impossibility. I don't know for a fact that that event was staged, but it kind of looks suspect.
It does. And that's the trouble with these things. We just can't know for sure, and it's difficult. And but then it's almost like a stain on his name going forward. And I think that's had a really
Yeah, it's a huge stain on his name because, again, there were people that you could speak to, like one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Joseph Burks, who was with CSETI from 1992, I believe, or 93 until 1997, when he had to leave because of personal and political issues with CSETI. But he said, in the 90s, Stephen Greer couldn't go anywhere without UFOs following him around. It's very similar again to what we're seeing these days with Christopher Bledsoe. Very similar situation. Just, Dorothy Izat was told by Dr. Jalen Hynek to stay off the radar, which she did. But again, she was another individual who was having a lot of that kind of interaction. And it's a shame if he did stage that, again, because it makes CE5 look bad as a whole when it was one of the greatest things that he brought forward.
it's difficult, really difficult. Well, before we move on from CE5, what can you tell us about the core principles and actual protocols? Because he came out with this app quite a few years ago now, but there's a lot of tones and sounds associated with it as well. So how does that all fit in, and what's the core principles behind that?
So when you're talking about CE5, the kind of bigger picture to that is contact modalities. And one contact modality is the CE5 protocols. And the CE5 protocols work, right? The CE5 protocols are a great uh, foolproof ABC instruction on how you can initiate contact with non-human intelligence. Before I describe them, I just want to say the CE5 protocols are a great guideline, right? You can use the first 2 or 3 steps and not have to do the rest, or, it depends on your temperament and your personality. Some people are going to do better with an intuitive approach. Some people are going to do better with a structured approach. So those are all things to keep in mind. But as a whole, the CE5 protocols do work, and the CE5 protocols are basically as is. The first step to the CE5 protocols is you're going to do some kind of meditation. Doesn't matter what tradition, what kind of meditation necessarily, as long as you do that meditation and it puts you in a calm and tranquil state. Generally speaking, after about 20 minutes of meditation and you're calm and you're centered, then you would do what he calls CTS, which is coherent thought sequencing, which he also calls remote viewing level 2, which is either remote viewing, or if you're not confident in your ability to remote view, you can say that it's advanced visualization, in which you're visualizing and or remote viewing either UFOs or non-human intelligence in deep space, starting from your current location, kind of like zooming out like Google Maps to slightly above your area, to zooming out, above the Earth, to zooming out in the solar system, to zooming out into the galaxy, and zooming out and seeing all the different galaxies, and trying to invite and vector in a peaceful encounter with non-human intelligence, and or visualize them and use a visual guide tracking back in the reverse in the direction, going back to the Milky Way, to the our solar system, to Earth, to your continent or and country and city, and down to the contact, back down where you are at the contact location, the contact site, and going back and forth seamlessly through that sequence visually for maybe 20 minutes. And again, with that takes practice. uh, Generally speaking, anything that you do over time, you're going to get more efficient in. At first that sequence can be like, at every different like visual aspect of it, you really have to concentrate and get it down. But I mean, if you're practicing this every day, there's going to come a point where you do like almost like I forget the guy's name, Dr. Bankington, where you're doing like the visual, like a flip book, and you could just do it seamlessly in a sequence where it's just like you can, within a second, you can go back and forth through the sequence like nothing after practicing so much. Uh, but there's tones that are associated with the CE5 app, which some of those tones were recorded in a crop circle in 1992, and I believe Colin Andrews was there. I believe Colin Andrews was the one who recorded it. Uh, and those were tones that they recorded within a crop circle. And again, part of the CE5 protocol is to use thought, light, and sound. That's what's called the contact trilogy. And you do this, the CE5 protocols, the meditation, the coherent thought sequencing, and also you can use lights and signal out into the sky, and play these kind of tones over radio and broadcast them out. Kind of, I guess that would be almost a little bit similar to Skywatcher using some kind of mechanic lure, dog whistle. Uh, so that's where some of the tones come in, the light. And you see people use lasers. I always caution against lasers, because you never want to point a laser at any moving object in the sky. If it's a plane or it's a pilot, like, you don't want to blind them. If it's a non-human intelligence, why are you shining a laser directly at them? Right? So things to consider. I've created a few presentations on my channel. One of them is called a practical guide to contact work. Contact work is another terminology that's talking about CE5 without the baggage of the CE5 terminology. Uh, so, and in that presentation or video, I described 4 or 5 different methods that you can use to do a human initiated contact. Uh, you know, there's a lot of emphasis here on the human initiated contact, and again, CE5 program sightings, the psionics. And my own experiences did not begin with me initiating it. Right, I was, you know I had the experiences first, and then I wanted to find answers. But this gets to a point with something that I'm working on with my friend, the Hermetic Penetrator, uh, called interactivity. Which speaks to like who's actually initiating the contact, uh, because with a lot of people, it seems like they're the ones who are lured in or baited by the phenomenon to engage in the practice, and they get kind of pulled in one way or another to interact in this way. And through the interactivity, there's an interactive component. There's a participatory component where between because there could be like a CE5 where, again, you're just called to come outside. You hear or feel a voice in your body, and you're compelled to go outside, and you go outside, and there's some kind of contact event that occurs, right? So uh, is like a more meta or bigger picture to CE5, to the psionics, to contact work. where the phenomenon is playing a big role in actually what's going on.
Yeah. Well, let's move that now into psionics, because it's only been a couple of months and we had Jake Barber, this first-hand witness to the crash retrieval programs, come forward. Huge story. It's kind of what we were all waiting for. But along with it came this word psionics, and this we found out that they'd been using these individuals' psionic assets to call in these objects. So, what can you tell us about that?
I mean, I'm grateful that Jake and his colleagues came forward. I think that the testimony and the work that they're doing has moved the conversation forward 30 years overnight. This, I mean, the whole idea of psionics. I mean, there was the Psionic Summit with Ubiquity University. That's available on YouTube. And again, Jake Barber defines the psionics as just like one. It's a way to utilize consciousness, basically, and that using psionics to interface with non-human intelligence is one application of psionics. Uh, but so I think that it's so funny because CE5 itself was greatly elevated by Stephen Greer, but it was also held back because of Stephen Greer. Because these ideas of using consciousness to interact with non-human intelligence, even in classified government circles, has been around since at least the 40s and the 50s at the very least. We see the Wilbur Smith memo, and they're talking about the anomalous mental phenomena. And so they people within the legacy programs always knew that there was this ESP psi component, and the Invisible College certainly knew about it, but they didn't talk about it. I mean, it was more they were doing the work in the background and not publicly commenting too much on it. But now it's out there for everybody to see, right? This is the stuff that is closer to the heart of the UFO legacy programs. You know, I heard from one individual that, you know, like the stuff they're talking about, um, retrieved non-human technology or technology of unknown origin. That's what was on the table for discussion first, right? That's what they're willing to talk about. So the more classified aspects of the phenomenon actually, from what I understand, have to do with biologics and communication. So, you know, again, just this aspect being brought in as part of the conversation when we're talking about UFOs, when we're talking about crash retrievals, is the psionic aspect. It was put out fictionally, right? But we have the Zodiac story, and one of the major parts of the entire Zodiac story was that the people that came to the crash retrieval site had missing time. They had this interaction with non-human intelligence where the UFO came in and basically covered up the crash retrieval, and it erased everybody's memory. There's a whole. I mean, you got to read the Zodiac story. There's a whole thing there. But one of the things that is discussed in that story is that UFO intelligence and these non-human intelligences have the ability to manipulate. They use the word, you can say influence, you can say manipulate. They said in that story that it's not telepathy, it's um, emotional influence or control. So that was just another interesting tidbit. But just speaking in generally, you have the telepathy tapes, and I mean, I was just blown away by them. And what was a major kind of thing that stood out to me in listening to the telepathy tapes was that the way that they're describing telepathy is accurate to me in the sense of what I actually experienced during some of my encounters. Is that it's not just like you hear a voice in your head. There's this whole other consciousness merger that's going on. And I mean, I had experienced that with non-human intelligence. I think it's more incredible to experience that person to person with another human. So that's why I think, in part the telepathy tapes are so incredible because, like, with UFO intelligence and non-human intelligence, you can speculate. Oh well, they're doing like telepathy and telepathic lock on and downloads, but it's facilitated by their advanced technology. With this other aspect of the telepathy tapes, human to human, they're not using technology. It's just potential, innate human potential, which is way more incredible in some senses than just like, oh, well, it was some technology that helped it happen. It's like these people just did it by being human. And, that's also reminds me a little bit of like cognitive human interface, which was on the slide 9, right? So it's like things are finally coming full circle.
They are indeed. And one thing there that you mentioned emotion as well. And Jake Barber speaks about this overwhelming feeling of love and that love is kind of connected to all of this as well. That really stood out for me. And, we don't know a lot at the moment about the Skywatcher team. They put out one kind of lengthy video on YouTube and they've got more coming. And I'm really excited to see what does come down the line. But what are you hoping to see? What would be the ideal thing for you?
Well, first I just want to kind of validate that. And, I've had conversations with people, even in the IC and whatnot. And we were talking about the cognitive human interface in CE5 and the effectiveness of it. And that aspect of love, like I had told them before, like, I hate to tell you this, but, that kind of love thing, it sounds almost new agey, but it works and it's effective. And in my experiences, I had the same kind of thing. I wouldn't have called it a maternal love thing, as Jake described it. The way it was, and this came as part of the download, was that they were related to us, in some kind of intimate way, and that they cared about us, and there. So it was. I had an overall, uh, yeah, loving, caring, and I've tried to kind of rationalize that over the years and say, I don't know if that's a manipulation, if that's like absolutely 100% genuine what is going on, if part of that feeling is our consciousness trying to rise to theirs, and kind of you experience what they're experiencing, um again, or if it's just some kind of mistranslation of sorts. uh I don't know, but that like overwhelming sense of love and care and is absolutely, uh, something that I've experienced, and I think that there's something genuine to that. But from the Skywatcher team, man, I have a lot of high hopes for them. Right? I mean, just because what the work that they're doing speaks a lot to what I've been, to the research that I've been doing, and the path that I've been on. So I really hope that they're able to deliver on in any kind of regard. I mean, if they're able to collect data and even just validating that whatever processes that they use works, to me that is, I mean, that's fantastic. If that within itself just, I know that they've talked about being, trying to get an object to land and to study it. Personally, it's hard for me to put my hopes up on anything like that. Um, I mean, if they can manage that, I mean, that would be incredible. Uh, I have a suspicion that a lot of the times when they had objects land on the range is that they were being taken down by the microwave weapons or scalar weapons. I don't know that they were ever able to get them to land um, on the range. Maybe they were, and maybe they'll be able to repeat it. Um, but I have a suspicion that the ones that came down uh, were taken down. Uh, but if they are able to just bring any kind of validity to psionics and that kind of consciousness aspect regarding the UFO phenomenon, I think that is like more than enough.
Yeah, it's very exciting times. Really hope that they can deliver the goods, as they seem to be very confident that they're going to. So we will see. Well, James, listen, man, thank you so much for breaking all that down for us and sharing your history with this kind of thing. It means so much. I want to thank you so much, man. Yeah, I just love it.
Definitely, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Always, man, always. And to everybody watching, we talked about a lot of different things throughout that, and there's going to be quite a few links in the description. So please go and check it out if you're interested. Once again, James, thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon. Take care. Goodbye.